Hello everyone, I'm Wendy and today we're going to be looking at achieving form when you're painting. Achieving form really means painting in a way that gives objects the illusion of being three-dimensional and not flat. For demonstration purposes, we'll be painting a simple pile of rounded rocks on the seashore, and the only colour we'll be using for the exercise is burnt umber. Achieving form is all about tone. You can easily see that this cube is three-dimensional. The light is coming from the left, hitting the front with a nice light tone. There's a mid-tone on the top, and where the light is not reaching on the side of the cube, then it's very dark. And these principles are applied when painting buildings, for example. Achieving form in rounded objects can be trickier because there are no nice sharp edges and you have to get a gradual gradation of tone. This is a technique that can be quite difficult to learn, but if you practice it a lot it does become easier, and we're going to look at this technique in this video. So what we have here is a very simple stylized drawing done in charcoal, which is why it looks a bit messy, of a pile of rocks on the seashore. Now what we're going to try and do is to separate these rocks in terms of tone and not by the charcoal line that's at the moment separating them. And we're going to give each individual rock form by graduating the tone on them. Before painting this exercise, what I suggest you do is a charcoal study. Charcoal is very forgiving and you can easily adjust the tone by rubbing with your finger, and then you can reinforce the darker tones again by putting more charcoal on there. The light here is coming from the left, so you can see the highlighted areas. There is then a mid-tone, and at the far side of each rock there is a darker tone. And can you see that the rocks are now separated by blocks of tone and not by a line that was drawn by the charcoal? This makes them very 3D and realistic. This is the effect that you're going to need to get with your paint as well. It is a really important part of learning how to paint, because quite often when you do start painting you are finding that you're separating areas with a line and it makes them very flat. What you need to get used to is working more with tonal areas. This is a speeded up video of how to tackle the pile of rocks, just using a few of them. I apologise for the flickering light on this as well, but can you see what I'm doing here? I've got a lighter side of the drawing on the left where the light's coming from, and then gradually towards the right hand side we're increasing the pressure. It's a charcoal pencil that I'm using here to give this suggestion of form in the rocks, and as you can see there is no line showing separating the four rocks in this particular example. Now we're going to have a go at painting these. Again, I do apologise for the flicker on this. It was one of my overhead lights I didn't realise was on the blink. So what I'm doing first is I'm going to cover the top rock with a very light mix of the burnt umber. I'm going to be working all these rocks individually, and I'm using the wet into wet technique. So that first layer you put on must stay wet while you're working into the rest of it. And now I'm adding on the right hand side where it's the darkest tone, I'm adding some very strong burnt umber there. And then what I'm going to do is gradually tease it out into the light wet paint. Now the second rock I'm going to approach slightly differently. I'm going on wet onto dry paper with the dark mix, and then I'm going to be adding some of the lighter mix as I go along to the light left hand side. The two ways of doing it, you can practice either practice both of them. I personally find the first one I did that little bit easier. Now I made a little bit of a mistake here by not getting the hairdryer on that top rock that I painted first of all, so I'm having to be very careful with this one to make sure it doesn't bleed. You really do need to leave the rocks to dry naturally, or to get the hairdryer on them before you paint the adjacent ones. Now I'm going to finish painting these 4 rocks, but I will speed the video up just to make it go a little bit quicker for you. In order to tease the dark paint across into the lighter area, what I do is, once I put the dark paint on, I rinse off the brush in the water, use a tissue to get rid of some of the excess water before I start teasing that dark colour across. What I'm doing here now, when the rocks are totally dry, is putting on another coat to reinforce the tonal difference between the light side and the dark side. You don't always have to do this, but if you feel you do need to accentuate it, then do put on another layer. In order to tease the paint across, again what I'm doing is rinsing the brush when I've put the dark paint on, and taking a little bit of the liquid off, and then using a wet brush to tease the paint across to the left hand side. It is quite a tricky technique, as I said at the beginning, and you do have to practice it, but at the end of the day it's not got to be perfect because the rocks aren't perfect, and the end result looks as if the rocks have got quite a lot of texture in them. Couldn't resist tidying that little bit up there where the 2 rocks had run together. Still an exercise that I did, but what I did here was made the rocks slightly different, more interesting shapes, and put a little bit of sky on here and a suggestion of the water. You can clearly see the pencil lines in this drawing. When you do drawings that you're going to paint watercolour in, make sure that you use a very soft pencil and use it very lightly, because what you're going to do is you're going to rub these pencil lines out, and in the next picture that I'm going to put up you'll see the difference once the lines are rubbed out. So I think mission accomplished here. We've got a pile of rocks here that are being separated by blocks of tone and not by a line, and each individual rock has got form, so the whole picture is looking 3-dimensional, and this is what we need to achieve in our watercolour paintings. Keep these principles in mind and try to apply them to whatever it is you're painting, and I hope you did find this video useful. You can always give me a thumbs up, and you can always subscribe. I've got part 2 of this particular series coming up soon, when we'll do a more painterly picture of rocks at the seaside. So bye for now.